Welcome to the City Library. When I saw what kind of a day it was, I thought, well, we'll probably have 10 the people who are going to be speaking, and surely someone will bring a supporter. But so I'm delighted to see such a grand crowd on such a lovely day. Today is a very important stage along the road towards the final decision on what Cork's favourite book is, a snapshot taken in 2013. And then there's going to be, in July and August, time for people to hopefully read all 10 of the books and make their own minds up and vote. And we'll have the announcement of the winner later on. But to introduce today's proceedings, I'm delighted to ask Patricia Looney, who's the Executive Librarian who actually came up with the idea in the first place and is responsible for the project and for today. So please welcome Patricia Looney.
Responsible for having you all in here on a lovely sunny day, so thanks a million for coming. The proceedings will be as it is in the programme that was on your seat. So there's 10 speakers for the 10 books. And we let it flow. I won't introduce everybody individually because it will just be a bit cumbersome. So we will have Sheila Maloney, the curator of 2020 Gallery, for Alan Corbett's The Ghost of Shandon. Maureen Quill for Maura Maxine Brewer's History's Daughter. Afric McGlenshea for Paul Durkin's In Praise of Which I Live and Move and Have My Being. And for The Hobbit, we have Maureen Rua Hayes. The Lobby Bar will be championed by Conor Creedon, and Billy Ramsell will speak for Jerry Murphy's poetry, My Flirtation with International Socialism. We're glad to have Johnny Hanrahan for Seamus Murphy's Stone Bad, and Mary Malone for Triggs, the autobiography of Roy Keane's dog. And John Spillane will speak for Mark McAvoy's Cork Rock, and finally Irene Kelleher for Pride and Prejudice. So I just want to thank all the champions for coming here today, and each and every one of them are great patrons of Cork City Library. And I suppose to use a word of the week, no moolah at all involved. So we will get started with Sheila.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here today to talk to you about one of the finest books ever written about this great city of ours, Alan Corbett's Ghost of Shandon. There's so much to say about this fabulous book. It's the first ever graphic novel set in Cork. It's written and illustrated by one of the city's most talented young bloods. It's a story that touches the heart and soul of both young and old readers. It's so hard to know where to start, but I suppose as this event is all about Cork's favourite book, and Alan's book is all about Cork. Let's start with that, with Cork. There isn't a Cork man or woman who will ever let a visitor leave a conversation without extolling the city's virtues as the real capital. Even if all they've asked is the time, or perhaps they haven't asked anything at all, or even initiated conversation. We are exceptionally proud of our city and county, and so we should be. We live, after all, beneath 3 iconic majestic steeples, travel down tributaries of mainways that have felt the footsteps of hundreds of generations, and dine on the finest foods out of one of Europe's oldest markets. But why, you might ask, am I telling you what you already know? Well, as we bustle through our busy lives in this wonderful city, it becomes easy to take the rich tapestry of Cork's past for granted. It's important in the history of this little island as one of the largest ports and as a melting pot for culture. Alan Corbett's Ghost of Shandon throws us, the reader, straight into that history, at one of the city's most influential periods. Set in 1792, when Dutch merchants, French Huguenots and local Irish tradesmen bustled around the city streets, laneways and canals that made up the thoroughfares at the time, Ghost of Shandon tells the story of Ronan, who was transported from present-day Cork into the past, and his mystical adventure with his new friend Aisling, an 18th century scullery maid. From the opening page, it's as if a microscope has been placed over the city, and locations and landmarks that we pass every day take on a new lease of life and new significance. I know when I read it, I found it so fascinating to go back and forth to the map in the front and locate exactly where the scenes of the book are set. There was a lot of exclamations of, oh yeah, I know where that is, and wow, that's where that building used to be. This isn't some fabricated land like the Shire or Camelot, this is Cork City. Alan meticulously researched all the local details of the city for the book and brought them together in a truly creative and engaging way. I've spoken to a lot of people who have read Ghost of Shandon, and the reaction from all from 7 to 70 is the same: utter awe, wonder and admiration for the city they love. It's so interesting to chat to children in particular about this book. All of them have been excited and animated talking about the characters and the mystery contained within the story. A child's imagination is limitless, but in an age where gaming and television play such a large part, there is a fear that reading, one of the best ways for nurturing imagination, is taking a backseat. It is here that Ghost of Shandon excels once more. While the concept of the graphic novel is not a new one, Alan has created one which speaks to today's children. It combines the suspenseful tale of a book with the detailed and enthralling imagery of a television show and the fact-finding task element of a computer game. All this together creates an environment that brings history and folklore alive and makes it relatable for children. They can take on the roles of Ronan, Aisling, or even the evil Dulacon as they read, and beyond the book into play. Ghost of Shandon absorbs their attention, sparks ideas, and opens their awareness to the world around them. That's not an easy feat in an era where attention spans are becoming shorter and the lure of the next bright shiny thing lingers constantly on the horizon. I could never claim to be an expert on writing, but as the curator of an art gallery, I know a thing or two about artwork, and I can wholeheartedly claim that the magnificent illustrations in Ghost of Shandon are some of the finest ever produced. The composition, the style, the detail, the rich colour, all align perfectly. Each one of the 100, and there are 100 illustrations in this book, are an work of art in itself. While illustration plays a part in literature, especially in children's books, it is, of course, particularly pertinent in this case of a graphic novel. Alan has incredible skill and an innate talent for illustration, and I believe his first book is the start of a new era in book illustration and in the placement of Irish illustration in the contemporary art world. We are truly lucky that Alan has so generously chosen to share his art with us. The great Pablo Picasso once said that every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist when one grows up. Alan has cleared this hurdle with feet to spare and is encouraging other young artists to follow in his footsteps in Ghost of Shandon. I've been lucky enough to chat quite a bit with Alan about his book and the upcoming second volume in this trilogy, and I understand it was his intention to create a book that would position Cork as a rival to Spider-Man's New York or Sherlock Holmes' London. I'm sure you will agree that he has done far more than that. In fact, I would say he's blown both Spider-Man and Holmes out of the water. In my opinion, books should be about losing yourself in a new world, connecting with characters, sometimes even becoming them as you journey through the pages. Reading and books are also a catalyst for conversation and sharing, especially where family reading is concerned. And so when it comes to Cork's favourite book, there can only be one contender. A book that does all of these things, as well as stimulating the imagination, encouraging adventure, and bringing the fascinating past of this great city to life. That's Alan Corbett's Ghost of Shandon. Thank you.
After that sort of reversal in my life, which isn't the first that such happened, but just to tell you that it's just great to be here, and thank you all for coming on this lovely fine evening. I'm sure you could have thought of a dozen other things to do, but you've made the right choice. So it is with deep delight that I endorse History's Daughter by Maura McSweeney, only child of Terence McSweeney, that I endorse it as Cork's favourite book, not just for this time, but for all time. Maura McSweeney was born at a pivotal point in Ireland's history. Her father's supreme sacrifice ignited the admiration and conscience of the whole world and forced the dogs of war to the negotiating table and brought an end to our war of independence. Moreover, 30 years later, McSweeney was the inspiration for Gandhi in his great peaceful move towards the independence of India. So, in truth, Maura is history's daughter, and this is her book. It's a great story. It spans 9 of the 10 decades of the 20th century. It's the writer, Maura, she fills the pages with a cast of remarkable characters, most of whom would have made a book on their own right. But in our read, we meet people like Maura McSweeney, her aunt, who was a fiery lady, one of the very fiery women of the First Dáil. She was the founder of Scoilita in the Wellington Road, with her sister, with Maura's sister, no, with her own sister, McSweeney's sisters. And she was, of course, she was the guardian of the writer, Maura McSweeney, in later years. And then, of course, there was her mother, the enigmatic Muriel Murphy. Now, Muriel was a rare beauty in every sense of the word. She was cut from a different cloth to the McSweeneys, daughter of a very wealthy family, the Murphys, Montenotte, not the Murphys of the Wellington Road, but in any event, look at the Murphys of Montenotte. And of course, she was a shadowy presence in Maura's life. But nonetheless, I believe that I knew very little about Muriel Murphy until I read this book. So for that alone, it's a very interesting read. And then, of course, she was less than 2 when her father died. But she makes a reference to her father at the start of the book. Her father was in jail when she was born, and some months later she was taken to see him, or at least to let him see her. And he had made a little fáinne, a little gold fáinne. He made it himself, and he pinned it on her baby dress. And that's one of the sort of tender, very poignant moments in this story. And of course she promptly did what all small children do. She put it on her mouth. So it had to be taken from her. But in any event, they are some of the characters that you'll meet in the course of the book. And, you know, the writer, she weaves a rich tapestry of personalities and also events. And as she moves her story from history onto politics, and then to the kind of things that we regard as being normal life. You know, there's romance, she gets married, she has children, and she lives out her days, and didn't die when she was well over 90. But as I said already, it's a great story. It's a story that will be read with relish. And having read it, I would say to you, rest it for a while, and then dip back into it again, and pick out the lively bits. The kind of stir your imagination. And as was already said, they would make fine conversation pieces around the fire on a wintry night, and a few pieces for a good political argument, which I think is the spice of life anyway. But it is a great book. It's a book of memories. And in it, I feel that Maura kind of sets down for us what it is that she herself wants to be remembered for. It's a book for this generation and every generation. It's the kind of book that you would want to be remembered for yourself by upcoming generations. But more than anything else, it's a book that connects us with, in a powerful and very personal way. It connects us with a time in our history, a time that was animated with idealism, a time when Ireland commanded the respect of the free world. and of course a time when the vulgarians of the Anglo-Irish Bank hadn't yet come into prominence. So it is a book to be proud of, it's a book to celebrate, and it's a book to cherish. And Maureen McSweeney, its author, is not alone history's daughter, she's Cork's daughter. She's the daughter of proud Cork people. So not alone is she history's daughter, as I said, she is our daughter, and this is her story. And by any yardstick, this must be, and has to be, and will be, and will continue to be Cork's favourite books. Other books they come into fashion, they're the fad of the moment, and then you know what happens. But that will not happen. This book, this, as I said, is Cork's favourite book of all times. And thank you.
It's very confusing having two lists. Hi, I'm here I'm very honoured to be standing here to champion this book by Paul Durcan, Praise in which I live and move and have my being. And have my being. The strange, thrilling title and the image on the cover, which reminds us of the awkward grace of a giraffe, suggests that something interesting is going to happen here. One of Paul's poems is called Passing Through, and I'll just read you some selected lines. There was a girl, and she was 12 years old, on tiptoes, on the north shore at the tide line, her hands on her hips, her long brown hair streaming down the back of her white frock. Not a single other creature on the shore, not a single vessel on the ocean. She was jutting out there as if forever, facing out to sea, all her life ahead of her. Around her, all of her 12 years. All those 12 years of hers passing through. All those lionesses of her 12 years. All those meditations of 12 years being a girl. Durcan could have been a painter. Poem after poem conjures these vivid portraits of people in certain settings, showing us their souls. Many of his poems are celebrations of women of all ages, and as it's predominantly women who tend to be buyers and readers of books, it's no wonder that all Durcan's collections always sell out all over Ireland as soon as they reach the bookshops. Actually, it was very hard to get a book, I found. They were all sold out. I mean, they were in the shops and they just go really fast. Which is not to say he doesn't have male readers too. I think men learn a lot about women by reading Paul Durcan. In this collection, as always, his narratives bring out the strangeness of the seemingly ordinary. And it's funny. Speaking as an old woman, he says, I am 82 and new as a snowdrop. In another poem, the sun beaming like a toddler on his potty. Above all, he believes in clarity because he's a communicator. Sometimes you get the feeling he's beside you in a pub relating an anecdote. There's an intimacy about his tone. For example, the collection opens with, on glimpsing a woman in Hodges Figgis bookshop in Dublin. I'm standing in line at the checkout of Hodges Figgis bookshop in Dublin on a Monday morning in July when I spot a woman pluck a book off a counter, fling it open, and start to write on the title page. With a retractable ballpoint biro, she repeats the action. She repeats it again. I am long-footed. And all the more so because she's an unlikely-looking book psychopath. Tall, blonde ponytail, blue denim outfit, country and western boutique style. Although it costs me my place, I drop out of line and slope around the book corner like a sheepdog on a recce, wet-eyed, to identify the title of the book and what she's writing in it. Perching on my hind legs, I see it's entitled Champagne Kisses by Amanda Brunker. And at each copy, in huge characters, she's inscribing the words Amanda Brunker, inscribing them with such concentrated flourishes as if the book was the Book of Kells. She turns around to a bookshop assistant and remarks in a low, husky voice, "Oh, I was just passing and I saw my books on your shelf, so I thought I'd sign them for you. Okie dokie." Cool. The author herself, Amanda Brunker. The first thing I think is, Amanda Brunker is immortal. The second thing I think is, Amanda Brunker is a looker. The third thing I think is, roll over Jane Austen. That's not the whole poem, you have to get the book to read the rest. But it gives you an indication of his nuance, his unorthodox, free-flowing monologues, and how he achieves his humour. With a sense of the ridiculous, with graphic description, suggestiveness, repetition, incantation, and dialogue. Never simply reportage, his poems highlight eccentricities of human behaviour, evolving into contemplation, usually culminating in humorous, affectionate insight. Durkin has you laughing out loud one moment and clutching your chest with emotion the next. His poems are collated in the most arresting way, so that if you read this straight through, you'll be going on an emotional rollercoaster ride. This collection is his 24th, so he's no longer in the throes of sexual exaltation or bewailing the difficulties of masculinity in the modern age. He's older now. He writes about friends who've died, but he manages to evade the morbid aspects of mortality. In Staring Out the Window 3 weeks after his death, he writes, "On the last day of his life, he lay comatose on the hospital bed. I saw that his soul was a hair which was poised in the long grass of his body, ears pricked." Later in the poem he writes, "And I thought, yes, that's how it's going to be from now on. The hair of his soul, always there when I least expect it, popping up out of nowhere." In another tribute to a relation who has died, the poem ends, "While you were sleeping, Paul, I died. Isn't it the most glorious morning?" Durkin's poems restore the grieving heart. Even when staring his own death in the face, he finds something to be optimistic about. "When I die, I will have space on my plate. I will miss time, but with such space, who can complain? Not me, not gloom." To paraphrase Dryden, the experience of happiness is not so much pleasure as rest from pain. While there is an underlying sadness in this collection, confessional narratives are told with typical Durkin charm. Besides, nothing can repress for long his innately exuberant celebration of people. For example, Dymphna, who taught him online banking. The Japanese woman sitting on the bench by Grand Central Canal, who tells him he's a brown bear. Breda, who has breakfast with him in Paris. The lady in Weirs, who sold him a watch strap. A docker at 80, walking his dog in the snow. Even the surly woman who gives him his free travel pass. He has a knack of seeing himself as he must appear to others. In Christmas in Paris, he writes of that old man in a cafe with his giant burger and frites and his big beaker of Sprite with a straw. Once he's given us a picture of this tragicomic spectacle, we are drawn in further to the poignancy of his solitude. His days are days of slapstick loneliness, but for these 2 hours, he knows almost bliss. The thrill of the traffic, the pedestrians, the stream of headlights of autos, the feet of thousands of people, the faces. You can't but warm to him for his self-deprecating, seemingly throwaway lines. "My hoary old white head overgrown like my garden and everything else in my life," he writes in early morning haircut. As always, Durkin lets his imagination rocket off like his boy from Belarus's hammer in the hammer throwing championship, or like his Algerian Berber barber who tells him, "My people, the Berbers of Algeria, are people from outer space." This after a conversation about who built Newgrange and the speculation that it was people from outer space, and the Berber said, "They were my people. We built your Newgrange." So it's very quirky, the conversations are very quirky. Durkin is a man who loves conversation. The entire collection is a conversation, as is human history. He quotes Baudelaire, "The scream we scream from era to era." He identifies with artists, literary and historical figures, with joggers and air traffic controllers, drivers, fellow bus passengers, dairy farmers, actors, with a short, stocky, curly, red-headed male Dubliner checkout cashier who says there's nothing to beat a batch loaf of bread. He connects the threads of human life not only in Ireland, but in the whole world. Humour overrides even fabulous loneliness and self-pity, which is personified as a lover demanding total, exclusive, absolute love, reducing a half-decent man to smithereens. Durkin envies the homeless man in the doorway eating a baguette, drinking wine, and reading the Da Vinci Code. If I had a gram of his integrity, his courage, his independence, I might make a go of it, sing as I have always yearned to sing, the song of my silence, of the men and women I love, of the places that make me feel at home. That's exactly what he has, the integrity. And what he does, he sings of the places and people he loves. Merging colloquial with the lyrical, humour with poignancy, praise in which I live and move and have my being, doesn't just celebrate the quirks of humanity and day-to-day moments. His poems also describe, as Durkin puts it, every preposterous improvisation of my soul. After reading this book, you will be wide awake every aspect of your life. Thank you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maureen Hayes, and I am here to convince you beyond a shadow of the doubt that The Hobbit deserves your vote. Firstly, I'm sure everyone here has already read it, possibly more than once, and that I think is testament in itself. All our childhoods were punctuated by great stories, be they about pigs or wizards, and The Hobbit sits comfortably among them all, the shorter and funnier cousin. But that is not to say that it will not appeal to older readers. Indeed, we will see just how exciting the adventure can be as we delve now into Middle-earth. Immediately, we are introduced to our guide and the title character, Mr. Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit. For those of you who haven't read it, a hobbit is a small creature, a bit like a gnome, but with long, hairy feet and a passion for their creature comforts. Indeed, Bilbo seems so contented with his small-town life that we are very confused when Gandalf, the great white wizard, appears at his door, telling him he is destined for adventure. I must admit, I was delighted with Bilbo's reaction. Very much the anti-hero. He dismisses any offers on the grounds that they will make him late for dinner. Yet Gandalf's arrival signifies the end of a very comfortable era for Bilbo and offers a glimpse of the fantastical world we are about to explore. We are then joined by a host of 13 boisterous, vengeful dwarves, with names like Oin, Gloin, Biffer, Boffer and Bumper, and a family history of warfare with goblins and dragons. We are drawn even deeper into Middle-earth. The dwarves are a great source of comedy, arguably the book's greatest trait, and on their arrival send Bilbo into a spin with tales of goblins, aggravating songs, and worst of all, raiding his pantry. As soon as we meet the rowdy motley crew who will lead us through the forests of Mirkwood, over the dangerous peaks of Misty Mountains, and eventually to the Lone Mountain, the stronghold of Smog. Needless to say, things don't go smoothly. Thus begins the introduction of Tolkien's legendary villains. As a fan of all things evil, it is to my delight that goblins, orcs, giant spiders, and werewolves begin to emerge. Tolkien provides a great variety of adversaries, from hair-brained goblins and aggressive dwarves to the sneaky, deceptive Smog, the dragon. However, the star of the show has to be Gollum. He is everything you could want from a villain. Sly, malicious, with just the right touch of repulsiveness. His riddle battle with Bilbo will have you at the edge of your seat, while his rasping voice and dark mutterings stay with you long after the book has been finished. Through interactions with his friends and these adversities, Bilbo grows from a stumbling homebird to a hobbit with an elven sword, a powerful ring, and some spunk. Armed with this newfound spunk, he really seems like a different hobbit, as he approaches the dragon Smog. But Smog is sneaky, and there is much riddling and twisting of words before Bilbo can extract anything of use. Again, Tolkien shows his skill as he illustrates the menace of the dragon. However, this battle of wits merely acts as a warm-up to the final battle, the battle of the five armies. Here all the characters we have met along the way are reintroduced. The elves, the goblins, the enchanted bear man Bjorn. War ensues, and Tolkien gives us sufficient detail to visualize the magical warfare, but thankfully not so much that we are lost. At this stage, it has probably occurred to a lot of you that this is quite a simple story. In that respect, you are absolutely right, but I think that is its selling point. Due to its simplicity, it can be enjoyed by people of all ages. Unlike in some of the later works, Tolkien does not get caught up in the folklore or history of Middle-earth, but stays resolutely focused on the story and Bilbo. Throughout the story, we feel ourselves growing closer to Bilbo, his lack of nobility making him a lot more approachable. His love for a good cup of tea never leaves him, and his quirks keep the tale light-hearted. The book has never been out of print since the shortages of paper during the Second World War. It has been nominated for numerous awards, including the Carnegie Medal and the New York Herald Tribune Award for Literature. I hope you can all see why, and give The Hobbit your vote. After all, who can resist an adventure? Thank you.
Hello and welcome, and I suppose really it was a big honour for me to be asked to come along and join in with these people to talk about these books, because you know it's a very prestigious group of books and people, and I suppose before like to pick the favourite book of Cork, it sort of seems to me that books are small but like food, and I suppose for me most things are a bit like food. No, but they are like food, because like if you go into a restaurant, most men, the first thing they go for is a steak and chips, and I'd be one of them probably, right? But then there are times that I might have maybe, you know, pasta with a bit of oil and a bit of garlic, some of the basil, maybe pesto, and just a nice glass of white wine. And then you're sort of saying, is that your favourite, or a steak? And then there's the day that you want the full Irish because you wrote it before, right? The rasher, sausages, tomatoes, you know, the stack of bread, the tea, and then like even some nights you might wake up at 3 in the morning and you wander downstairs and you go into the fridge, and my fridge can't get into it, but I look into it. And I look over to the left and I say, oh, Rice Krispies, right? So I make a bowl of Rice Krispies, and you know, I sort of, you know, the milk, maybe a bit of honey, and if I flick on the telly and there's a Western on, it's like food heaven, right? So the thing is that to pick a favourite is always, I think I'd have an issue with picking the favourite of anything that is sort of a creative endeavour, really, because it keeps changing in people's heads. There was, about 25 years ago in RT, the presenters started getting slightly above themselves and brought in agents to negotiate their wages, and RT decided, look, we better find out, this is crazy, this guy is saying I'm the most popular, I'm the favourite, so they had a big survey as to who the favourite was, and it turned out basically that Gay Byrne was the favourite, right, and that Jerry Ryan was the second favourite, and that Pat Kenny was the third favourite, and it went down to Larry Gogan and that kind of stuff, and they said, fair enough, we better pay them the money. And then some bright spark and an accountant said, yeah, but if we pay them extra, we have to cut money from the bottom. So they decided to have a least favourite as well. And so they did a subtle survey on who the least favourite people on Irish television radio were, right? And surprising enough, the least favourite person was actually Gay Byrne. The second least favourite person was Jerry Ryan. Kenny was the third least favourite. So I suppose it's like damn if you do and damn if you don't. I don't know how I get on with this. I know it's my favourite, but it's definitely an incredible book. And I don't have a favourite book, and I'll tell you why, right? First of all, a disclaimer, right? I never really drank in the lobby. I wasn't really a lobby person, right? I used to go to the gigs upstairs, right? But I wouldn't be around the bar there, right? I wouldn't be a friend of Monica over the years, the girl who brought this book together, right? So it's totally, I suppose, I'm coming with fresh eyes. And when the book was first to be launched, I thought, that's a great idea, a pub, because pubs are like families launching a book. And then there was the launch, and the launch was in the PAV, and I went over because Cork being a small town, I knew most of the people who drank in the lobby, people like the musicians, I knew people who worked there, so I went over, and it was a great day, and I bought the book. I brought it home, threw it on the table, and every now and again I'd take a flip through it and say, God, that's a great book. And that was it. And people come into the house every now and again, they'd pick up and say, God, that's a great book, the lobby, and put it down, right? But one night, about 3 in the morning, when I was eating my Rice Krispies, this is the truth, there was no Western on the telly, so I found this, right, and I read it. And to be quite honest with you, right, it genuinely, it sort of knocked the socks off me because it wasn't what I expected. I thought it was going to be like a fanzine of our pub and our friends, right? It basically, first of all, it's 118 pages long, but you get to page 40 before you even hit the lobby and Pat Conway and all that. And what it is, it's a social, cultural, sort of music, history of the city from the view of that corner over there, right? And that corner that I'm talking about, it starts with what was O'Flynn's bar, known as the Donkey's Years back then. That was a known man's bar, right? Next door was the Phoenix, which was more or less various hues of green republicanism, various hues of socialism, communism, and most of them wouldn't be talking to each other, but they'd all be drinking buddies kind of stuff. And in fact, the phrase times that they were called the counter-revolution, the people along the bar. But then next door you had, what you call it, the Riverview. And the Riverview would have been where I would have first been an underage drinker, and it was one of those bars where underage people were served. And in a funny way, that's very important because that's sort of gone now, and there was a micromanagement of the situation then, because the Riverview and around the corner, the Black Swan and Heafy's, which was next door to the Riverview, young people could get served. And there was sort of a self-regulatory thing whereby, and this is all in here in a very subtle, non-contrived way. Like the bands used to drink in Heafy's. Heafy's would be like the punk bands, people like Donnelly and all those people, Mean Features, None Attacks and all that. And there was a whole vibe there, right? Next door then was the Black Swan, and to my memory, it was mostly busmen rather than dopplers that you find around the corner in Riverview. And then next to that there was a doorway that led to a 70s lounge bar called the Alderman, and that was sort of like a carpet wall. And the thing is, these 6 bars, they all had their own dynamic, and there wasn't a great mishmash between them, right? But I suppose what is interesting about this book is that it lists the families that ran them before Pat Conway took over, like the Willises in the Phoenix, and the guy Moore who was running Heafy's. And it also explains a time before we got slightly above our heads, going back 30 years ago, because in the late 70s, early 80s, when Cork was hit by Forwards Dunlops, and ultimately Pat Conway, the guy that sort of was the champion in a way of the lobby, he lost his job in Little Island, and I guess that was the trickle-down effect of Forwards Dunlops. The town was I think our perspective as a people was very different. It was very organic, and for example, the Phoenix would have been known as the house, the Tom built, because every week he'd blow a wall down here, and then he'd move the toilet from there to the stairs, and then he put another stairs in the front and took out that stairs, and then when the living room was upstairs, he sort of went up there, and then he built the mezzanine upstairs, and then went back downstairs and blew up the back wall, and it was just constantly a change that you sort of really couldn't do 20 years later with things like, and they're all very important things, with things like planning and conservation and all that. But he wasn't the only one, because at that time, a lot of those bars that were considered men-only bars, they were only men-only because there was no ladies' toilet there. And to use the toilet, if you were a lady, you had to, or a woman, or a girl, or whatever the term is, the right term, being politically correct since we're there now. But you had to go upstairs to the family, where Mrs. would be up there. Like in my history, it would have been Collins around the corner, or even Callans a few years ago. You have to go into the house where they'd be having their dinner, watching the telly, and if the granny was sick. So you have to acknowledge that you're in someone's house. And I think that in the 30 years, we've sort of, maybe we're going back to again, we've sort of lost that. And I think particularly with like the so-called Celtic Tiger, where bars were things that were levelled and rebuilt, there was a real sense of, let's make this thing work. And I suppose I'm going to be very brief here, to get to the lobby bar itself, right? The lobby was a very small bar, is a very small bar, and the room upstairs is actually smaller, where the venues were held, where the gigs were held. Totally, like the Bumblebee, like it shouldn't work. Like it, only 80, maybe people, 100 people at a crush could fit in there. And if you were bringing people down from Dublin or Galway or the States and putting them up overnight, paying bar staff, paying someone on the stairs to take the money to the door, and ultimately pay 2 musicians, there isn't much change there. And if you get a bad house, it's a total loss. But yet, it survived for an awful long time, for actually, like, I think 17 years or something, right? And this wasn't, like, if you go to the end of this book, there's an index of every gig that was played there, right? And the thing is, if you look at each month, you're talking about maybe 28 nights that there was gigs on in the lobby. That's not counting what was going on downstairs. And like in the lobby itself, there was an upstairs, downstairs thing going on where they said that often the people who drank downstairs never really went upstairs, and vice versa. The people who went upstairs to gigs very rarely drank downstairs, except for these killer gigs. And I suppose what it really was, it was like a nursery or a breeding ground for singer-songwriters and musicians. And see, the thing is, you'll find that it's not just a Cork thing. Yes, we certainly have John Spillane and John Wolfe and Owen Connolly and all these people, right? But there was also a lot of out-of-Cork people who came and sort of set up camp here because there was a place, people like the Valdys, not only because, but it was a good place to play, people like the Valdys and all those people. And when you look back through the list of the people who played, and like Glenn Hansard and David Dempsey and John Spillane and all these people, and you sort of realise that why would they be bothered to play in an 80-seater venue that's crushed up the stairs, right? The only reason is that because they really wanted to, and they realised the value of the space, right? I suppose the thing is, because it's sort of a book about a pub, you wonder, like there's lots of anecdotes and memories, and some really interesting ones. Like there's one where Damien Dempsey was playing there, and the place is so packed that he actually decided to go out onto the street and play to the people who couldn't come in, right? There's another story where I think it was Owen Connolly was up on stage, and he noticed the shuffling in the crowd, and he was wondering what's going on, and some fella came in and said, "Lads, there's a fucking shark in the river," right? He was talking about the time the whales came up, and the time the pot of whales moved into the city, and like John wrote that song, Killer Whale, and I suppose really, what I'm really getting to is that there is a narrative here too, right? And the narrative is that this whole place, this view of the world, of Fords, Dunlops, the Snugs closing, the ladies' toilets coming into bars, regulation of, like, where underage drinkers now can't drink in bars, so you get a bottle of vodka and go to a field, it's a lot better, right? No, but all this kind of regulation, it all came to an end. And it came to an end at a very strange time, right? It came to an end in 2005, the year of City of Culture. And I think City of Culture was a brilliant year for the city, and it was a very good year for me, and I think it was very good for all that. But it was in the middle of the Celtic Tiger, and as a culture, we did start to maybe run away with ourselves a small bit, and things got very regulated. So the lobby had a plan to do 100 gigs on 100 nights and record it and film it, and then sort of regulation came in, and you had issues with things like performing licence, and then health and safety with fire, and then to put it upstairs, and you had to deal with conservation because the building was listed, and the whole thing got so complicated that this was an enterprise that was running as fast as it could just to stand still. And this just, I'd say, too much. That's what it seems to be in reading this book. And it was just time to walk away time. And that, I think, a living culture sort of died at that time, and that is the narrative of this book. It's the organic beginnings to this sort of end at the height of our cultural expression. And I sort of think that if it's a bit like people finding culture, sort of killing it, and then stuffing in a glass case. And I have no doubt that in 50 years' time, there'll be some quarter in Cork where there'll be this big bar, a small bar built, and there'll be musicians in the corner with grandfather shirts and waistcoats and flat caps, and there'll be a rope around them, and there'll be a whole bunch of people walking through with cameras, filming out the far side, and getting a glass of Murphy's, right, on the way, or maybe Beamish, I don't know, but we had it, and we still have it in the way, right, because when the lobby closed, these people were dispersed, and Ricky Lynch in the book does mention that he felt very sad and lonely, and almost homeless, and where I drink in the corner house, they scattered the place like the spot being where there was music, and there was a bunch came to the corner house, and the corner house is actually 2 rivers away from the lobby, and I remember us people in the corner house used to call them the boat people because they came in and they weren't really sure where they should stand for a while, right? And you just say no to them, and anyway, I'm going to finish up here, right? I suppose what I'm really saying is that why this book is so important, right? And I don't think it's a favourite or anything, right? And I think really congratulations to Monica for this, right? Only because I'd be very slow to go about favourites in anything, right? In family or friends. Politicians are very fond of more and always have been. I'm very slow to call a favourite on anything, right? But if you were to search an archive and you came across a little book that was written in 1613, right? And in there you came across a corner of Cork from that time, right? With all these first-hand accounts, like this isn't a book written by Monica, these are people, their own people telling their own stories, right? And you say, wow, this is amazing. And the photographs aren't like press photographs, they're snapshots taken by Eileen Healy and stuff. This is very hardcore, real stuff. And you got a glimpse of what it was like, the snugs, the drinking on the Union Quay with the guards up the road and all this kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. You'd realise, you'd realise you had a piece of gold in your hand, right? So if you project forward 400 years, and you found this, and that's what we have. See, the book from the 1630s hasn't been built, hasn't been written. This one has. And I think that's it, right? It's a living testament of a very strong culture, and very proud to have it, and congratulations.
Today I want to talk a little about impact. If you play team sports and you've been tackled in the line of duty, as it were, you'll know that impact is created by a combination of 2 different factors. What are they?
Velocity.
Weight and speed. Velocity, weight and speed, right? Weight, I'm sure many of you know, was known to the Greeks as gravitas. And there are many writers who we praise justly for their gravitas, for how they deal with weighty concerns, with serious issues raised strenuously, with authority. Speed, on the other hand, was known to the Greeks as celeritas. And there is also a school of writing, the school of celeritas, the school of lightness, that achieves its impact, its effect, through pace and a lightness of touch, through a dark playfulness, through misdirection and sleight of hand. And today I want to talk to you about Jerry Murphy, a Cork-born member of the school of celeritas, a contemporary inheritor of this great literary tradition that stretches from Cervantes through Kafka, through to Murphy himself, and others along the way, of course. I'm talking about the terrible lightness that shows, as in Kafka's great story, a man turned into a beetle suddenly overnight for no reason. Or that shows, as in Don Quixote, a perhaps mad Spanish gentleman out jousting with windmills. And it's the same zany, disorientating likeness that we see in My Fair Patient of International Socialism, which I'm asking you to vote for today. We see it in poems like Murphy's Only a Matter of Time, which shows us a boy walk out the door in the morning for school, and return an old man by the time the school bell has gone and he walks back in the door with a school bag. A terrifying poem. Or in his Borgesian Fragments, which envisages the entire history of the universe as a tattered user's manual, written by a minor, disaffected god for the amusement of demons. It's been written, in fact, I actually wrote it myself, to be honest. But I didn't want to claim credit for it, but it just seemed a bit too pretentious to say it's been written. But in a review I wrote, you can't talk about Murphy's work without mentioning 3 L's. Lenin, laughter, and love. Lenin first. From his earliest days, Murphy has been a rebellious poet with a social and socialist conscience. And as the title of the book indicates, My Flirtation with International Socialism, he is not mellowed with the years. Far from it. In this volume, there is a satire of a most bitter and caustic kind. To give you an example, New Arrivals, which shows a recent arrival in hell, condemned forever to wear a burning Charvet shirt. Or in Free Kick, which shows a boy racer meet a gruesome but hilarious end. Yet there is also satire of a subtler and more insidious kind. In poems like Bedside Manor or The Monks, that approach us stealthily, speedily, from an unexpected angle, and before we know it, rob us of our assumptions. These poems and others in the book, like Appeal or In the Retirement Home, highlight the wicked and unique sense of humour for which Murphy is justifiably well known. Yes, this is one of the few contemporary poets who makes his readers laugh, who moves us to genuine laughter. But no sooner has that laughter sweetened our mouths than we realise the joke's on us, and that it's not really funny. It's not funny at all. But all you can do is laugh some more. What other choice do you have? The final L word I mentioned is love. And I know that many of Murphy's readers over the years have been drawn by the many exquisite love poems he's written. And if it's eroticism you're after, My Flirtation with International Socialism, it's kind of hard to say, isn't it? My Flirtation with International Socialism, but don't let that put you off. If it's eroticism you're after, My Flirtation certainly won't disappoint. Yet the erotic verse in this volume is of a tradition that emphasises recollection as much as copulation. For me, the love poems gathered here brought to mind the art dealer in Milan Kundera's novel Immortality, who distills his past love affairs into a few precious mental images, a gallery of erotic memories he desperately attempts to sharpen and define against the dulling effects of time's passage. I'm referring to poems in My Flirtation like Matins, Morning in Cephalou, and the achingly beautiful Septet at the End of Time. Perhaps one or two of you here today may be aware that Jerry Murphy's first collection of poetry, A Small Fat Boy Walking Backwards, was published 27 years ago, just down the road in Conley Hall. This was an event that has gained semi-legendary status, but Jerry talks about it a lot anyway, and which that'll get you as far as semi-legendary in my book. The audience that night consisted of 7 people, which is actually the same amount that attended the first meeting of both the Gaelic Athletic Association and the Communist Party of China. And so paltry was the attendance in Conley Hall that night that the reading and the launch took place in the lift. And Murphy read to the assembled faithful as the shuttled up and down that unloved piece of architecture. But since that less than auspicious beginning, Jerry Murphy has gone on to win not only national but international renown, a journey climaxing in this book, My Flirtation with International Socialism. It is a strange dream of a book, where the 3 kisses so delicately placed on the poet's hand in the title poem become the 3 Borgesian fragments, dissolving in turn into the oh-so bittersweet recollection of 3 rooms, into the 3-card trick that is a book of hours. yet this dream is nothing but treacherous, shifting, and unstable. It is a theatre of satire and desire burning around our ears. And into that furnace I ask you now to venture, to read this book and vote for it, and give in to a lightness of touch that is not only bearable, but for the greater part, irresistible. Thanks for your time.
Hello, I'm here to champion Stone Mad by James Murphy. And I want to say that it's a privilege to do so. It's a privilege to be here. And usually when people say that, I kind of get bored and start looking around to see if somebody good looking in the audience. But I genuinely mean that because I feel that I'm among friends in a variety of ways. Firstly, a lot of people I know and like here. Secondly, Amanda Bruckner is on the shelves there, and Peter Carey is also there. And Amanda Bruckner, as you all know, is a looker, even if she's not here in actual person. But I suppose, like Conal, I'm championing a particular book in the full knowledge that there are many other books here as well that have a great claim to greatness and to being Cork's favourite, or anybody's favourite. And I have a particular relationship with quite a few of them. And I get married a lot myself. But my daughter was in love with a man who was 250 years older than her for a long time, which was a worry to us, I have to say. She was only 14 at the time. But she got over him anyway, Mr. Darcy. And whether it was himself or Colin, I'm not sure which she was actually in love with. But anyway, he played a big part in our lives for quite a while, so Pride and Prejudice has meant a lot to me personally. I also actually wrote her a story called How to Live for her wedding, which she thankfully has only performed once, last year, which is called How to Live. And it was based on Paul Durkin's book, the magnificent piece of poetry that Africa has described so well and championed so well. And it was about an old man who was dying, who actually retraced all the locales of this book and actually left Kerry diamonds in all the places. And ultimately his granddaughter had a necklace made in Weir's Jewellers, which is where the Neanderthal lady with the swatch strap is in Paul's book. So Paul's book is practically like my back room. I know it so well. I've been drunker in the lobby bar than any other place. I can safely say on many other occasions. And I can assure Conal that it will never be a museum, because there are young fellas already in Cork, in the Kino, starting up a place very like it. And I feel that that tradition and that spirit and that soul of the city that was encapsulated in that place at that time will never die. And we won't have a theme park here, we'll have a living city. And it's coming from 17-year-olds just as it came from us and the people before us. That's my fervent wish and belief at any rate. So I suppose I just want to say that there are lots of books here that I think are fantastic. And I also want to say that my greatest personal hero, Terence McSweeney, and his daughter have been extolled here, that I'm writing a play about Terence McSweeney. I'm not saying that for self-advertising purposes, or for the chance you might come sometime, but because Terence McSweeney deserves a play and a book from every writer as far as I'm concerned. The whole world stood still when he was dying. And a magnificent man coming from Cork is a man to be relished and celebrated, especially in the times that we're living in. But I had the great pleasure in 2007 of actually adapting Stone Mad by Seamus Murphy. Now, Stone Mad sort of hung around our house when I was a kid. It sort of just formed part of the fabric of life. It was a bit like Cork City itself. I took it for granted. It was just there. I read it in a desultory way. Everybody knew it. Everybody knew that Seamus Murphy was the most affable man in Cork, a great sculptor, pleasant personality around the place, etc. But I never really engaged with that book seriously until I was asked to actually adapt it. And when you're adapting a book, as any of you who act here, or who write here, or who aren't original enough to actually make up your own stories but have to rely on other people's, in other words, anybody who makes a creative act out of a creative act for somebody else will know, when you're doing that, you engage with it in a way that you don't engage when you're reading or engaging with it for leisure purposes. In other words, you listen to every cadence, you examine the system of images, you engage with the personality of the person writing it. This is the same man writing the end of the book as wrote the start of the book. What parts are essential, what parts will get by on stage, what parts won't, what parts are mere literature, what parts will actually thrill a 5-year-old, what parts will thrill a 75-year-old. These are the kind of questions that you wrestle with as you're adapting. And of course, the reality is that that book grew in stature with every moment that I devoted to its adaptation in my mind. And it became very clear to me that I wasn't dealing with something that feeds the nostalgia industry, which is so prevalent in the city. It isn't to do with the matters of museums or of how we once were. It was actually a living, dynamic, intellectual document that actually engaged me in a way that few do. This was a man completely at home in his own city, writing about that city in a completely distinctive way, and in so doing, absolutely elevating Cork and its people to a level of significance, not in any kind of competitive way, because we do know we're the best, but just in the sense that he dignified and never glamorized, but always gave real credit to what really mattered in this city. And that's what struck me as I was actually adapting it. Now, I was here a few weeks ago doing a show which was called The Music of James Joyce, and in that I talked about Joyce a lot, and about my love of Joyce. Now, as you know, his father made a disastrous mistake in moving from Cork to Dublin, and the course of world literature was changed because of that. But even allowing for the fact that Joyce had poor material to work with, the actual city of Dublin was actually transfigured in Ulysses, as we know. I use the word transfigured advisedly. It's not just changed, it's actually rendered holy, rendered radiant, rendered more powerful than we could possibly imagine. He transfigured the city of Dublin and made it a locale of the imagination and of the soul. And in doing that, the dusty, the ordinary, the corrupt, the venal were also more dignified and all brought within the walls. In Joyce's house, there were many mansions. And so a man masturbating or eating kidneys is just as important as a grand statue or a discussion about Hamlet in the National Library on that day when nobody seems to do any work at all except hang about talking and walking. And in so doing, he rendered Dublin a place of extraordinary, searing intellect, but also of profound compassion in the figure of Leopold Bloom. Now, it's my argument here today that Seamus Murphy does not attempt the same process in Stone Mad, but his achievement is as universal and as compelling and as powerful for the city of Cork as James Joyce's is for Dublin and the world. Seamus Murphy was a sculptor, and therefore Seamus Murphy knew about materials. He knew about the material world, and he knew about the material city. Something that we all take for granted, or certainly I did, and continue to do, and I'm being lazy. What I mean by that is, we walk down these streets, and unless we're actually on a guided tour, or unless we're somebody like Maureen Quill, who actually has the natural brilliance to identify the divine in the simple, we don't actually look carefully. Seamus Murphy, because he made things, actually doesn't just look at things, he looks right into things. So, when you look at a Cork building now, or when I look at a Cork building now, I can't look at it in the same way that I looked at it before Seamus Murphy wrote his book. Because just as Wordsworth and the lads transformed the Lake District, just as Joyce became the laureate of Dublin, Seamus Murphy has reinvented Cork. He hasn't changed it, he hasn't transfigured it, he has rendered it real, as sculptors do, actual and material in our minds, in a way that is simply irresistible, as far as I'm concerned. So, my point is, to start with, that if you're looking for a book that Cork people love, the first thing you should maybe do is look for a book that loves Cork. And in this case, that's what I'm talking about. So that was the first thing I wanted to say. What am I going to say now? Oh yeah. Yeah, the other thing is about the way he does it. I regard Cork's dominating personality as being cordial, affable, exquisite good manners, violent satire in the background, contempt for bullshit of any kind, and a kind of joyous insularity. Now, the pathological version of that is chauvinism, of course, and we do suffer from that. But we also, I think, have, when we're being healthy, a very strong blend of sense of where we're from, combined with kind of an airy cosmopolitanism. And that's exactly what I think Seamus Murphy captures in his book. In a throwaway style, in a kind of conversational narrative, in an experience that's quite like sitting down with a guy in the Palace Bar, as so many great people did, and chatting about the world and his wife. You get an experience that tells you everything about Cork, but also tells you about Cork and the way we look around us at the world. It's a grand vision. It's not a pretentious vision. It's very like Jerry Murphy's vision, actually. One which is concise, matter of fact, and yet grapples with greatness and epic themes just as much as it does what's going on next door or what you had for your breakfast. And that particular idiom I find incredibly charming and incredibly powerful, because other people are sculptors of language, and I celebrate them and praise them to the rooftops. But there is something very, very wonderful about a man whose natural idiom is other than the word, who can actually achieve so much with the word. And that's another feature of this book that I want to remind you of, as I'm now advocating so strongly that it's the favourite. I think it's very important to remember that this man used words for the love of it, not because he felt he had to or because his profession was driven by it. He wanted to tell us something, just as you tell your mother a story or that kind of thing. It's a simple thing. Now, in so doing, he actually inspired many other writers, most particularly, and to my knowledge, the absolutely great Cork poet Elaine Quillinan, whom you probably know. She talks about the fact that, like me, she never knew what Cork was about at all until she went for a walk with Seamus Murphy. So the river gods on the bridges, the lintels over the doorways, ruined and decaying buildings, the actual material fabric of the city suddenly became a living, radiant entity to her. Somebody who would have regarded herself as surrounded by dereliction, a lost empire, and a civilization that was basically in decay. By his vision, by his way of looking at these things, she was completely restored to a sense of Cork as a vibrant, important home of the South. So therefore, I think there are other examples as well, which I don't really have time to go on with, or even things to read out, which I won't bother with. But basically, if anybody's interested really in other idioms for expressing the same truths, you really should have a look at Elaine Quillinan's book about Cork, which she did with Brian Lawler in the 70s, a lot of you may already have it, which is just a stunning and almost verbal version of the poetry that's encoded in stone in Seamus Murphy's work. So my real point, and my final point, I suppose, is that Murphy, like all great writers, doesn't just write about his life. He doesn't just dramatise his own experience. He dramatises a whole society. That's what they say about Brian Free, that Brian Free doesn't write about his own life even though he does. R. Yeats, who wrote only for his own pleasure apparently, according to himself, they actually encapsulate and celebrate and give back to us the whole place that we're actually living in and that we're taking for granted. He's absolutely at ease, as I say, with the Cosmopolitan. This is no insular book, this is no guidebook of a parish or some minor backwater. I refer to the airy cosmopolitanism, and it's very important to remember that Seamus Murphy comes from the great tradition of the Wandering Masons. These are people who built the cathedrals of the Hanseatic League, who wandered all over Europe, who built Chartres Cathedral. He comes in a direct line. Sculptors nowadays very often don't even know how to use a chisel. The reality in his time was that these people were using skills, materials, and objects, which actually had descended to them by word of mouth and by sleight of hand from people thousands of years old. At the moment, just an ad for myself, I'm doing a musical tour of Cork every week on Wednesdays in the Vision Centre from now on. And in so doing, I had to choose texts that really, really mattered. And Seamus Murphy's text is one of those. There are things in that text that I refer to, because I don't have the copyright to actually use them directly, but I refer to them as being absolutely crucial to any kind of understanding of this city. And the guide to those musical tours of various places, and particularly of Cork, in a sense is Seamus Murphy, because Seamus Murphy derives directly from the Gabon Sayer of myth and legend, whom you all are familiar with. That is to say, the legendary mason whose achievement was not to put things up, but to take away the road between places by the power of his storytelling. Now, as far as I'm concerned, Seamus Murphy isn't a man who's written about a particular place in a particular time, infused, unconsciously supported by thousands of years of artisan activity in Cork City itself and around the world. I consider him as having made a world masterpiece, which we are very fortunate to be able to claim as a portrait of our own city. And that, as a love letter to Cork, is why I feel Cork should write it a love letter back. Thanks very much.
Hi folks, and thanks very much
me one of the best week's entertainments I've had in a while, and so much so that it came to bed with me, and I've, for the first time in quite a while, been reading to my husband in bed, and he's really enjoyed it. I won't tell you anymore, but this book is hilarious. I know the speakers before me, I'm guilty now of nearly forgetting what I was supposed to say because I've had such fun here this afternoon, and you spoke about Cork and about buildings and about the bars. Thank you, Conan, for the Rice Krispies at 3 o'clock in the morning, good tip. And really the only thing left to speak about is the characters of Cork. And come on, guys, Roy Keane is one of the main characters of Cork. You mentioned Keno, I presume it was my Keno you were talking about. But this book is hilarious. Paul Howard, I haven't really read all of his Ross O'Carroll ones, but I certainly would be going out to get them. And to write a book from the perspective of a dog, it's just fantastic. It's brilliant. We have it all wrong. Humans, we haven't a clue. And for those of us who have dogs, thankfully I have a golden Labrador at home who I look at very differently, I can tell you after reading this book. They're taking it all in from the moment as Triggs is Roy Keane's dog. As Triggs said, from the moment Roy Keane carried him over the threshold and he peed down his legs, they were in love. You know, and Triggs carries us on a journey through all of the football history the last I don't know how many years, and I do know the offside rule, I do know it, and so does Triggs. And one of the first things that Triggs tells us in this book is that the media reported that Triggs, Roy Keane's dog, is dead, and they got it wrong. Not alone was he not dead, he isn't a he, he's a she. Triggs is a girl. So I was thrilled instantly. I connected with this book because here is someone else who has been imprisoned with football for years and years and years. I've got a husband and 2 sons. They don't realise that I'm a girl, and I had to stare at screens for years and years and footballers, but I always knew there was a story behind these footballers, and now I found out there is. You want to hear the bitching in this book about when David Beckham comes to visit and rearranges all of Roy Keane's, the cans in his presses, and all of his toilet rolls were in a neat roll after he left. David Beckham has OCD. Did you know that? Isn't that really interesting? David Beckham went to a museum in Madrid with Victoria, and when he realised that you couldn't buy anything there, he wanted to leave. And he came to visit Roy Keane in a t-shirt and a pair of jeans. Roy didn't recognise him. Where was the beautiful bustier that he usually wears, and the hair wasn't quiffed, and all the rest of it. So you get a real insight into all the characters that I have admired their legs, admittingly. I called my son David. Come on, I couldn't do much more than that. I gave him every single haircut that David Beckham had. So now I know what really goes on with David Beckham. You have Ryan Giggs, and you have Jack Stam, or Stam Jack, whichever way it goes, a personal, real enemy for poor Triggs. He hates him with a passion. He bit him one day. She bit him, sorry. And he realised long before Alex Ferguson did that Jack Stam was really the problem for Man United. That he, you know, it took Alex a while apparently to get to this. And at the end of the day, I can't do the Cork City accent, I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, as we know, is Roy Keane's favourite saying, and Triggs also has picked it up and uses it quite a lot here, particularly on the day that he went into his sports room or recreation room, and there was this monstrosity of hardware sitting there, the ugliest thing and most expensive thing, he said, apart from Jack Stam, that he'd ever seen in his life, and it was a treadmill. So whatever happened to walking the dog? But Roy Keane, a tenderness was shown, and here he is. He looked at poor Triggs and he said, "Don't worry, Triggs, I got one big enough for 2. Hop on." So poor Triggs had to endure the treadmill for quite some time until Roy, thankfully, was in really bad humour after a game one day, and Triggs woke up from a nap and heard all this banging and knocking going on, and there was Roy belting the bejesus out of the treadmill, and he had taken it apart. And thankfully, as Triggs said, he finally realised that humans need to be walked. So that was one up for Triggs, I think. And he also had a personal hatred for Mick McCarthy. And no matter how much I might try and avoid football, I don't think anybody in the world could avoid what happened in Saipan and Roy Keane, and you'll find out the truth in here. Poor Roy, he was just carrying out his duties. Triggs did not want him to go. It was nothing to do with the World Cup, he just didn't like Mick McCarthy. So he did not want Roy to play with Mick McCarthy or for Mick McCarthy or whatever way I should express it. And it's all very, very clearly documented here with a really nice build-up as to why he didn't like Mick McCarthy. And just to read one tiny bit, he says, as you can see, you know, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. I have all my little tabs. I felt I was coming to school today to do an exam because I really feel you have to have the fun that I had with this book. I have laughed about football now and I know all about these guys who run around in shorts, you know. But here anyway, this is what he says about Mick McCarthy. I'm after losing the page now for all my talk. He says, sorry, I do have it. I know Mick McCarthy thinks he suffered during Roy's fail to prepare, prepare to fail phase. While he can count himself lucky he didn't have to live through 1999's "The dictionary is the only place where success comes before work," Mark Twain, and 2003's "Failure is the opportunity to begin again more intelligently," from Henry Ford. Corkman? I'm not sure. To say nothing of 2005's "He who is carried does not realise how far away the town is," Sierra Leone traditional. Those I bore with the cheerful stoicism for which we descendants of Newfoundland are renowned. So that's poor Triggs. Triggs has the history, like so, fail to prepare to fail is really just the last in a long line of, I believe. Triggs also shows us the tenderness that Roy Keane could show, the time he found him in the tumble dryer in all the beautiful towels, and that he had, you know, left several messages in there. He didn't beat him, you know, he looked after him and was really kind to him. And I suppose the love and affection that he showed for Triggs, it's all in here, and it just gives us a very different perspective to Roy Keane than what the media have portrayed him as. The book opens with Triggs reading about apparently his own death on the paper, her own death, and seeing this photograph that we're all very familiar with after the Saipan incident. And his description was, and he said, "I was looking a lot fitter in the photograph and I've realised how much I've aged. As for Roy in a t-shirt and a pair of jeans and looking like a joyrider." So that's what he had to say about that photograph. But seriously, I want to champion it on, Paul Howard is a phenomenal writer. I mean, I try and do a bit myself, but really, I think, and I know one of the previous speakers said it, and I don't want to, you know, insult anybody by getting the name wrong, so I'm not even going to say it, but reading for me, or any type of storytelling, it's entertainment, and it's the entertainment factor. And if you want to laugh, and I think genuinely we all need it, we don't get enough of it, please, please vote for this book. It's going to make you laugh and make you laugh out loud. It'll also make you go back and reread it, because what it did for me on a serious note was I remember where I was, or where we watched particular games. I remembered the age my kids were at when we went to, at home maybe, and watched it before they brought in that 9 o'clock rule. And, you know, it will take you down a journey of memory lane. There's no serious part really in the book, but there's a huge amount of information and a huge amount of knowledge. And I think it just is testament to Paul Howard's talent, how he can do that and still make you laugh out loud and take very little of it seriously. And yet, I feel I have travelled a long journey with this book. So I'm just going to finish off, and I know you're all going to vote for it now because you're all very much dying for a laugh, and I'm sure you want to read it to your husbands and wives in bed as well. It works, lads, I'm telling you. I'm just going to finish off with, sorry, here it is, somewhere. And I put end on a page and now I've lost it. Okay, so Roy Keane says, "Unlike humans, dogs don't talk shit." So there you go.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here to champion this book called Cork Rock, From Rory Gallagher to the Sultans of Pink. And the book is written by Mark McAvoy, and it's a most excellent book. And it's a celebration of rock and roll in Cork, from the early days of the show bands and Rory Gallagher to the Arcadia and the punk era up to the present time. It's a brilliant piece of work. I think it's fantastic that there is a book with the history of rock and roll music in Cork, and it's fantastic that it's done so extremely well. And I'd like to congratulate Mark on a huge amount of work that he put into it. And it's a brilliant book, and I'm delighted to be championing it here this afternoon. And I urge you all to vote for Cork's favourite book, Cork Rock. Woo-hoo! There's a list of Cork rock and roll bands at the end of the book, and it goes on for, there's many hundreds of bands in there. And within this book, there's about 1,000 other books. You're familiar with the Commitments by Roddy Doyle. Well, every one of these bands, you could write a commitments about it. You could write a number of books with it. Did you get it? 1,000 books within the one book, lads. This is a book and a half. And I'd like to read out some of the names of the bands. Above the Maple, A Cow in the Water, Alice in Wonderland, and the Wrestling Jellies, Anomi, Anthony and the Confidence, Antibodies, Aaron the Elderly, Asylum, Bacchus and the Pars. Well, even the very first band, Above the Maple, I remember Above the Maple. Anyone else remember a band called Above the Maple? There was a Chinese restaurant called The Maple on Patrick Street, and this band used to practice in the room above the Chinese restaurant, and they called the band Above the Maple, and then they changed their name for some unknown reason to Benny's Head. And it had something to do with this guy Benny and whatever the shape of his head was. He was a member of the band. This book is a great celebration of rock and roll, fun, joy, excitement, melody, drums, bass guitars, electric guitars, lead vocalists, ego, energy, madness, talent, love, excitement, dreams, bravery, expression, etc. Heart. I remember the time Adolf Grunt, there was a band in Cork called Adolf Grunt, and the time your man bit the head off the chicken over in Sir Henry's. Blood everywhere. That was during the punk era. Mark has done a fantastic job in this book. It's also a very brave book in that you have to be brave to call it. You know what I mean? Somebody has to say who gets in the book and who doesn't get in the book. You know, what's important and what isn't important. Do you know what I mean? It's not about like who sold the most records or that kind of stuff. And there's fantastic stuff in it, of course, about Rory Gallagher. And I'd like to read you a little quote now about Rory. There's a lot of people interviewed in this book about, you know, various bands and various rock musicians and all that. So anyway, we're talking about Rory Gallagher. Rory came to play with us when he was 15 years of age. What people don't know at all is that he was very introverted, very shy, and he stood back in the corner. At 15, he could play guitar as well as someone who was 25. He knew every Buddy Holly tune there was to know. His two biggest songs were Buddy Holly and Lonnie Donegan songs. He used to sing The Valley of Tears by Buddy Holly. Now, there's lots of great stuff in this book about Rory. And one of the best things about this book is that you can see how Cork has expressed itself through the medium of rock and roll, and how the personality of Cork comes out in the rock and roll bands. And for example, Mark says at one point that Cork rock music's two most inspirational figures were Rory Gallagher and Finbar Donnelly. Now, Rory Gallagher is a world famous musician, of course, and we have the Rory Gallagher library here. And but Finbar Donnelly, I'm delighted that Mark has put him up there as being the great Cork rocker, because hardly anybody has heard of Donnelly, but he was, and that's the way rock and roll goes. I'd like to go back to the list and Cathal Coughlin, Cavalcade, Censored Vision, Charlie Lone Surf, Citizen Elmo, Richard Collins, Niall Connolly, Crowd Control, Crystal, Cyclefly, Cypress Mine, Exit, Pursued by a Bear, Espresso Mambo, Fact or Fiction, Foyle Go Down to the Sea, Mick Flannery, Flex and the Fast Weather, Free Fall, Rory Gallagher, Goldfish Syndrome, Adolf Grunt, Hidden Fears, Mean Features, 9 Mozzies from Banya. One of the things, I won't go on too much longer now, one of the things that comes out through this book is that there's great personality in the Cork rock bands and in the Cork songs. And it's often called quirky, but you have great tradition of rock bands in Cork, like the 9 Mozzies from Banya, Five Go Down to the Sea. You had Donnelly, who wrote a lot of mad songs, like Stairway to No Pence. You had Gertie O'Leary, you had very colourful and rich characters, and I'd like to say to you that it's a brilliant book. That's about it, really. Great characters, Mick the Punk, Mick Finnegan. Mick Finnegan used to work for the corporation, and he used to fix the traffic lights. And at one time, all the rock and roll bands in Cork had a set of traffic lights at each side of the stage. Because he was getting the leftover traffic lights. And that was the feature of Cork rock music. But I think it's a brilliant book, and congratulations to Mark McAvoy, and I'd urge you all to vote for Cork Rock.
Universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. So begins one of the greatest books of all time and the favourite of millions all over the world. Written 200 years ago in 1813, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen is as relevant today as it was then. Austen has often been criticised for not writing about the events happening in the world at the time she was writing, the wars, the class struggles and the poverty. But Austen wrote about what she knew and from what she observed in her own circles. She wrote about manners and morals, and her characters are still well known to us today. I think it is precisely because Austen does not place a historical background to her novels that her stories and characters are immortal, and they will continue to be so. Probably her best loved and definitely her most read book is Pride and Prejudice. Originally she titled this novel First Impressions, which, although it is appropriate in some respects, Pride and Prejudice is the perfect description of the drama that unfolds. Most of us can place ourselves in the position of Miss Elizabeth Bennet, so prejudiced against Mr. Darcy that she willingly believes every bad thing she hears about him, disregarding that her sources may be unreliable and prejudiced. As she says to Mr. Darcy when he first proposes to her, "I have every reason in the world to think ill of you," even though she doesn't really know him. Elizabeth learns a valuable lesson not to judge people harshly without knowing the truth. And speaking of the whole truth, although it is a favourite scene by many female fans of the BBC Pride and Prejudice series, he did not actually jump into the lake wearing a white shirt, although it was quite a lovely scene in the film. However, like Elizabeth, his character is so well written, and many of us can recognise this character maybe a bit in ourselves or in others in contemporary life. Mr. Darcy also learns a valuable lesson. Although he is not quite the arrogant, disloyal and selfish character Wickham paints him as, he is very proud, and he does not make a good first impression during his time in Netherfield, looking down his nose at everyone. His vanity in believing that Elizabeth Bennet would be wishing and waiting for him to propose, and he believed himself far above her and all of her family. But he's not afraid to learn from his mistakes, and he forces himself to persevere to show Elizabeth that he has taken notice of her criticism. The second time that he proposes to Elizabeth, it is a sharp contrast to the first. He is gentle, unassuming and sincere. He says to Elizabeth, "You taught me a lesson, hard indeed at first, but most advantageous. By you I was properly humbled." Mr. Wickham enters as the seemingly gallant officer, a very colourful character full of warmth and charm, appealing to all he meets and most particularly to Elizabeth. Many readers will understand what type of person Austen is depicting when she writes of Wickham. Most of us have known a Mr. Wickham at some time in our lives, or even perhaps fallen for one. His darker side is revealed to Elizabeth by Mr. Darcy, and his thoughtlessness and selfish act of eloping with Lydia brings misfortune to all of the Bennett family. A mother, or should I say an anti-mother figure in the novel is Lady Catherine de Bourgh, Mr. Darcy's aunt. The scene between Lady Catherine and Elizabeth is one of the most famous and is the most performed scene in the novel, as this portrayal of the relationship between mother-in-law figure and daughter remains timeless. Paula Lynch and I will perform an adaptation of this scene, and just to give you a bit of a background on it, shortly after the engagement of her sister Jane to Mr. Bingley, Elizabeth is very surprised when Lady Catherine de Bourgh calls to Longbourn. Lady Catherine has something very important she would like to ask Elizabeth.
You can be at no loss, Miss Bennet, for the reason of my journey hither. Your own heart, your own conscience must tell you why I come.
Indeed, you are mistaken, madame. I have not been at all able to account for the honour of seeing you.
Miss Bennet, you ought to know I am not to be trifled with. A report of a most alarming nature reached me 2 days ago. I was told that not only was your eldest sister on the point of being most advantageously married, but that Miss Eliza Bennet would soon afterwards be united with my nephew, my own nephew, Mr. Darcy. Though I know it to be a scandalous falsehood, and I would not injure him so much as to suppose the truth if possible. I instantly resolved on setting for this place, so that I might make my sentiments known to you.
If you believed it impossible to be true, I wonder you took the trouble of coming so far. What could your ladyship propose by it?
At once to have such a report universally contradicted.
Your coming to Longbourn to see me and my family will be rather a confirmation of it, if indeed such a report is in existence.
If you then pretend to be ignorant of it, was it not industriously circulated by yourselves? Do you not know that such a report is spread abroad?
I never heard that it was.
And can you likewise declare that there is no foundation for it?
I cannot pretend to possess equal frankness with your ladyship. You may ask questions which I shall choose not to answer.
Miss Bennet, this is not to be borne. I insist on being satisfied. Has he, my nephew, made you an offer of marriage?
Your ladyship has declared it to be impossible.
Well, it ought to be so. It must be so, while he retains the use of his reason. But your arts and allurements may, in a moment of infatuation, have led him to forget what he owes to his friends and family. You may have drawn him in.
If I have, I shall be the last person to confess it.
Miss Bennet, I am not accustomed to such language as this. I am almost his nearest relation in the world, and am entitled to know all his dearest concerns.
But you are not entitled to know mine. Nor will such behaviour as this ever induce me to be explicit.
Let me be rightly understood. This marriage to which you have the presumption to aspire can never take place. No, never. Mr. Darcy is engaged to my daughter. Now what do you have to say?
Only this, that if it is so, you can have no reason to suppose he will make an offer to me.
The engagement that exists between them is of a peculiar kind. From their infancy they have been destined for one another. It was the greatest wish of his mother as well as of hers. While in their cradles we planned the union. And now at the moment where the wishes of both sisters would be accomplished in their marriage, to have it prevented by a young woman of inferior birth, of no importance in the world, and wholly unallied to the family. Do you pay no attention to his tacit engagement with Mr. Bourgh? Are you lost, child, to every feeling of delicacy and propriety? Did you not hear me say that from his earliest hours he has been destined for his cousin?
Yes, and I had heard it before. But what is that to me? If there is no other objection to my marrying Mr. Darcy, I shall certainly not be kept from it by knowing that his mother and aunt wish to marry Mr. Bourgh.
But honour, decorum, prudence, nay, interest forbid it. Yes, Miss Bennet, but do not expect to be ever accepted into this household if you wilfully act against the inclinations born. You will be censored, slighted, and despised by all of us. Your lines will be considered a complete disgrace. Your name will never even be mentioned by any of us.
These are heavy misfortunes, but the
The wife of Mr. Darcy may have such extraordinary sources of happiness necessarily attached to her situation, she could upon the whole have no cause to repine.
Obstinate, headstrong girl, I am ashamed of you. It shall not be. And if you were sensible enough to your own sphere, you would not wish to quit what you have been brought up with.
In marrying your nephew, I should not consider myself as quitting that sphere. He is a gentleman, I am a gentleman's daughter. So far we are equal.
True, you are a gentleman's daughter. But who is your mother? Who are your aunts and uncles? Do you imagine me to be ignorant of their condition?
Whatever my connections may be, if your nephew does not object to them, they can be nothing to you.
Tell me once and for all, are you engaged to him?
I am not.
You likewise promise me that you will never enter into such an engagement.
I will make no promise of the kind.
Miss Bennet, I am shocked and astonished. I came here expecting to find a reasonable young woman, but do not deceive yourself into a belief that I will ever recede. I shall not leave this place until you give me the assurance I require.
And I certainly never shall give it. I am not to be intimidated into anything so wholly unreasonable. Your ladyship wishes Mr. Darcy to marry your daughter. But would my giving you the wished-for promise make their marriage at all more probable? Supposing Mr. Darcy to be attached to me, would my refusing his hand make him wish to bestow it upon his cousin? Allow me to say, Lady Catherine, the arguments with which you have put forth this extraordinary application have been as frivolous as the application was ill-judged. You have widely mistaken my character if you think I can be worked upon by such persuasions as these. How far your nephew might approve of your interfering in his affairs I cannot tell, but you certainly have no right to concern yourself in mine. I must beg therefore to be importuned no farther on the subject.
No, not so hasty, if you please. To all the objections I have already stated, I yet have another to add. I am no stranger to the particulars of your youngest sister's infamous elopement. I know it all. How the young man's marrying her was a patched-up business at the expense of your father and uncles. And is such a girl to be my nephew's sister? Is her husband, the son of his late father's steward, to be his brother? Heaven and earth, child, what are you thinking? Are the shades of Pemberley to be thus polluted?
Lady Catherine, you can have nothing farther to say. You have insulted me in every possible method. I must beg to return to the house.
You care not then for the honour and credit of my nephew. Unfeeling, selfish girl, do not consider that an alliance with you will disgrace him in the eyes of everybody else.
Lady Catherine, I have nothing farther to say. You know my sentiments.
You are then resolved to have me.
I have said no such thing. I am resolved only to act in that manner which will constitute my own happiness without reference to you or to any person so wholly unconnected with me.
It is well. You refuse then to oblige me. You refuse to obey the claims of duty, honour and gratitude. You are determined to ruin him and to make him the contempt of the world.
Neither duty nor honour nor gratitude have any claim on me in the present instance. No principle of either would be violated by my marriage with Mr. Darcy. And as for the resentment of his family or the indignation of the world, if the former were excited by us marrying, it would not give me one moment's concern, and the world in general would have too much sense to join in the scorn.
And this is your real opinion? This is your final resolve? Very well. I shall know how to act. I take no leave of you, Miss Bennet. I send no compliments to your mother. You deserve no such attentions. I am most seriously displeased.
Right, well that's the end of that. It might be 1813, but obviously Moolah was very important back then too. I want to thank you all for coming, but especially to thank Sheila, Maureen, Afric, Maureen Rua, Conal, Billy, Johnny, Mary, John and Irene for that last advocacy there. It just shows, you know, what a wealth of and a various thing the books of the world are. And I'd be inclined to agree with things like Johnny and Conal said, like that it's impossible to arrive at a favourite ending. Whether it's even in poetry, just so you have to make up your mind. and there's only an hour and a half feel for that. But I hope the people here today and the people who will read the books over the summer and the people who will follow it online will get as much pleasure as we all got today from the 10 presentations. So on your behalf, it's my pleasure to thank everyone who spoke here today, and enjoy the summer and enjoy the summer's reading. Thank you.